From Kona to Yenan, The Political Memoirs of Koji Ariyoshi. Chapter 1, Kona, The Early Years. One of these days I will appear in court to answer the Justice Department's fantastic charges that I, and 6 others here, advocate and teach the overthrow of the government by force and violence. The court will ask me whether I will plead guilty or not guilty. How else can I answer in honesty but to say firmly that I am not guilty? Since my arrest and indictment I have carefully gone over in my mind my activities up to this day, and I find that I am innocent of the charges directed against me. Since the indictment, I have naturally looked inward and backward over the span of my years in Kona. I do not do this with any doubt or misgivings in my mind that I should have taken other courses. I am proud of what I am. The charges against me and others under the vicious Smith Act, the modern version of the infamous Alien and Sedition Acts which long ago brought widespread fear and revulsion to the people, are tissues of lies, to whip up fear and bring conformity to the war program in this day and age. I now review my life in Kona principally to look at conditions, events, and people that molded my early thinking. During my formative years I was exposed to conditions that made me think and left deep impressions upon me. I was born and raised on a coffee farm in Kona. I spent some time on a sugar plantation, as a pineapple cannery worker, as a longshoreman on the Honolulu and San Francisco docks, in our public schools here and at the State University in Georgia. I was evacuated from the West Coast when war came and lived behind barbed wire and watchtowers of Mansena Relocation Center. From there I volunteered to work in Idaho's sugar beet fields when farm laborers were scarce, and from there I volunteered for the Army. Because I am a poor coffee farmer's son, and have worked with my hands almost all of my life, even while a student, my loyalty has always been strongly with the downtrodden, the workers and farmers. Early in life I was exposed to the necessity of stealing the coffee we produced on our mortgaged farm in order to obtain cash for family needs. Numerous poor farmers did this under cover of darkness, carrying coffee to independent farmers who either sold it for them or bought it from them. At times we felt our whole world crumble around us when we were caught by the coffee company and threatened with eviction. Then when I was grown up, the coffee company hired me to pay off family debts, but with high interest, low coffee prices, and the exorbitant rate charged us for groceries and fertilizer by the company, we were submerged in debt. One of my work assignments was to spy on farmers who bootlegged coffee, just as we did. I caught some of them, but I never had the heart to turn them in. I only cautioned them. Those were dark days for us in Kona, and I tried to grope for answers and solutions to our problems. I wrote about the hardships of farmers in Kona, and the Star Bulletin published a series of articles by me. Footnote: Ariyoshi wrote 3 series of articles on Kona coffee. See Honolulu Star Bulletin the 19th of April and the 21st of April 1937. The 10 articles published between the 13th of July through the 23rd of July 1958 and the 6th of March 1939. The series dealt with the debt mortgages of Kona coffee farmers, and finally, the reduction of old debts in 1939. Footnote end. I felt that people outside of Kona should be informed and that publicity would help correct the bad conditions and bring help to the depressed coffee industry. Then I became interested in writing, and writing helped me think. I began to observe everything about me more closely and critically. Even to this day I am deeply stirred whenever I reminisce about my formative years in Kona, for despite all its natural beauties, my birthplace, which holds an attraction for tourists, had its harsh and brutal side for the toiling farmers who worked from sunup to sundown. Day after day, many of them going deeper and deeper in debt year after year to the coffee factories. There seemed to be more bad years than good, for once a farmer was set back because of storm or drought that ruined his crop, or because of low coffee prices. The coffee company mercilessly sold groceries and fertilizer on credit at frightening prices and bought the coffee cheap at prices they set. I saw neighbors leave Kona, crushed by the burden of debts. I heard complaints from farmers who had almost no way of redressing their grievances. Their land was owned by landlords, who in some cases, like the Heinz, also had a coffee mill and store. Because they leased the land which the landlords would not sell, and because most farmers fell into debt at one time or another, they were afraid to organize and take their complaints to the coffee companies. The Heinz, for instance, did not then, nor do they even today, permit farmers to pulp their coffee berries at home. This processing would mean extra income for tenant farmers, but the Heinz have the Captain Cook Coffee Company, which does the pulping. As a child, I listened closely to all that was said, for a high coffee price meant better food and firecrackers at New Year, new clothes instead of window-patched ones. I began to work early in life, and my mother taught me, as other children were trained, to pick up the overripe coffee that had fallen on the ground when I was 2 years old. We watched the horizon in the spring for signs of a storm or ocean fog, for it was then that the honey bees sucked and pollinated the fragrant, snow-white coffee blossoms. Storm and fog killed the flowers, and if such a calamity came, we worked the whole year round with heavy hearts. It meant then that we had to bootleg the coffee we produced on the mortgaged farm, under cover of darkness. As soon as I became strong enough to carry 50 pounds of coffee, I participated in these midnight activities when Mother shook us up. Barefooted, so as not to make alarming noises, we carried bags of coffee away from our farm to a party who bought them or sold them for us. Thus, we got money for school books, for occasional meat, and for offerings at the church to the priest and to Buddha. But there were years when we had bumper crops, and knew, too, that our lives would be no better after all the hard work in the sun and the rain. I remember when Father told us about the extensive territory that was Brazil, where more coffee was produced than the people of the world could buy, and year after year the farmers there were forced to deliberately burn their crops. We naturally asked many questions. Why can't the people buy coffee? Why do they keep producing so much if the crop must be destroyed? Why can't the Brazilians think of us? What was depression? Why must it come back periodically? Can't someone do anything to bring happiness to people? The questions, of course, were not put in those terms, but put forth they were with such content for Father to answer. It was in this environment that I began to grow in mind and body some 37 years ago, and my early development there charted the road I would tread in society. Kona was a great school and Mother was my best teacher. When I was about 5, Father became ill with a weak heart. For Mother, a woman of small frame weighing about 85 pounds, the task and responsibility of looking after our 8-acre coffee farm was exceedingly heavy. Her hands were calloused and cracked and deeply stained by the green grass which we tried to keep down by hoeing and poisoning. Every night about 10 or 11, like a ritual, I went to her as she sprawled out on the thin quilt spread on the floor after the hot bath. I massaged her tired and exhausted body from half an hour to an hour and a half, while asking her questions born of deep curiosity and a passionate desire to learn from her, and left her when I heard her sinking into slumber, breathing like a relaxed child, tired out after a hard day. Mother told me about her sugar plantation life. Father was indentured to serve 3 years for a sum slightly over $10 a month, and Mother worked for $7.50. Footnote. An indentured labor system was generally used in Hawaiian plantations from 1850 to 1900. The practice was greatly modified in 1886 when an agreement was signed to import Japanese workers. The system ended in 1900 with the annexation of Hawaii by the United States. See Beechert, Working in Hawaii, page 79 to 118. Footnote end. Men, young and strong, could not take the daily ordeal, and many drank soy sauce to work up a fever in order to stay home. Unfortunately, there were informers, she said, and the lunas, straw bosses and overseers, once put wise to this machination, dragged out the exhausted and sick workers and chased them into the fields, cracking their whips from atop their horses. Chinese who stayed home were dragged by their long queues as the lunas galloped their horses while hauling the men to work. In the early morning as the laborers went into the fields, the lunas cracked their whips over the heads of the indentured serfs, which Mother used to describe as just like Arthur Greenwell and his cowboys cracking their whips while driving their cattle. The Greenwells are big ranchers and landlords from whom numerous Kona farmers lease their land, besides the Gaspers, who were Portuguese. Arthur Greenwell and his family members were the first white people I ever saw. In driving their cattle down to the beach from the mountain pastures, the cows crowded the narrow highway and dashed into coffee farms if the stone fence was down or the gates were open. If this happened, Arthur Greenwell told us in his booming voice exactly what he thought of us. So, whenever we were working on our farm and we heard the cracking of the whips and the yelling of the cowboys, we rushed to the highway to fasten our gates. If Father was there he would stand and stare back in disdain and answer in Japanese what the Greenwells said in English. Several times I heard Father say something like this. They came with the Bible, some of these landlords, taught the Hawaiians to sing psalms and took their land away. That is no way to use religion. There, God knows, I idolized my father because he was a fighter. After he became ill, he devoted all his time to helping people iron out their problems, domestic and otherwise. He was a man of considerable influence and prestige in Kona, as old-timers know. Perhaps the proudest moments of my life came when I saw Father stand on the rostrum in our Japanese school, and in his down-to-earth Japanese urge all students not to be afraid or discouraged but to keep attending school. This was shortly after World War I, when, as now, attacks against civil rights and privileges of non-whites, Germans, and political minorities knew almost no bounds. The Japanese language school was being outlawed. The Hawaii Hachai, under the militant editorship of Fred Makino, fought the case to the U.S. Supreme Court and won. You have nothing to fear, Father told us students. Tell your parents to keep sending you to the Japanese school. Men like Makino, Shibayama, and Morita are leading the fight, and the Japanese residents will win the right to free education, he said. One year, we had a new principal at the Japanese school. Some of the older students whispered that he had only recently served time in prison. I asked Mother if this were true. It was then that she told me about strikes on the sugar plantations, for higher wages and better treatment. This principal of ours was a great man, she said. He did not go to jail with others because he did wrong. He went for others. He was a leader of the 1920 Japanese strike on sugar plantations. That was why the rich plantation owners used the government to put him behind bars. And she told me of Makino, a familiar name in our family, being jailed in an earlier strike 1909 because he had supported the Japanese strikers. Much later, I found out that Yasutaro Soga, editor of the Nippujiji, was among the many who were jailed. We know of this 1909 strike case as the higher wage conspiracy. The employers charged that the organization of workers for higher wages was dangerous to the existence of capital and the government they controlled. The employees on the plantations in 1909 were getting about 65 cents a day. We are fortunate to have our new principal, Mother said. You must study hard. Because we were poor, my brother and I stayed home to work during the coffee season. At that time, Kona's school system did not provide coffee vacation from September to November. To make up for time lost from school, we went to night school at the principal's home for our Japanese lessons, and to Miss Cahaliano's home for our English lessons. Mother's influence on me was decidedly strong. I need only to tell a story to illustrate it. Shortly after Father's death, when I was about 10, my elder brother and I went to a gamecock fight. Footnote: Koji Ariyoshi was second youngest of 5 children. The oldest sister was Shizue Uchida, second oldest, Yukiko Matsumoto. Koji's older brother was Koichi, and the youngest brother, Suo, died while Koji was in Georgia. Footnote end. Mother was informed of our whereabouts and she sent for us. When I returned home, she was shaking like a leaf, crying as I had never seen her cry before. She must have thought that we had gone to the dogs so soon after Father's death. Mother asked us to kneel before Father's tablet, before the shrine in our home. She asked us to promise that we would never gamble as long as we lived. It is nearly 30 years since the incident, and in all those years, this pastime has held no attraction for me at all. I am fortunate that I have a mother who forged me into a rebel who would strive to substitute good for bad and did not leave me to become an antisocial rebel who would commit crimes to eke out a living, or a spineless creature who would prostitute himself to vested interests, or cringe before them. Thus I grew and moved toward broader and newer horizons. I came to social understanding not by way of books in those formative years, but by way of hard-knock experiences. I was no intellectual, but a working stiff, moving in the strata of the working class that occasionally knew hunger and deprivation. I acquired a deep feeling for people, regardless of color, and particularly for the downtrodden, as I learned as time went on that my salvation rested not in dog-eat-dog competition, but in a common struggle to better our lot. Fortunately, I was not poisoned by prejudice and discrimination in my formative years. Very early in life one learned that people are all alike. I had an awe for the white man, but Mother dispelled this from me. Even in the matter of gods she had a ready answer. During the spring months in Kona, Sunday was a holiday for us. I began going to Sunday school and brought home cards with pictures of Jesus, Moses and Mary. One day I asked Mother, "Is Jesus Christ our Lord?" "No, did you learn that at Sunday school?" she asked in half surprise. "Yes." Mother explained to me that Jesus Christ is a white man's God, that our God was Amaterasu Omakami, the sun goddess who descended on Japan and started the imperial dynasty and the Japanese people. Christ is a white man. Look at his skin and hair, she said, pointing to the pictures. Can I still go to Sunday school? I asked. Surely you may, she answered with a tolerance and understanding I came to know so well. It keeps you out of mischief. Because Mother had a deep feeling for others, we never had difficulty with labor shortages during the coffee harvesting season. Espiridion, a young Filipino, who lived with his immigrant mother 3 miles from our home, commuted to our farm or lived with us. U10, a Korean immigrant, lived with us for many years. All our laborers stayed on until the harvesting had been completed. But one evening in the midst of the peak season, I saw Kim, our Korean laborer, rolling his quilt and straw mat into a neat bundle. I ran to tell Mother, whose face immediately took on a disturbed expression. She rushed to Father and both of them hurried to Kim. What happened, Kim-san? Mother asked. Kim looked Father square in the face with fire in his eyes and said, Papa-san, you said the Koreans are no good. He accused Father of saying that the Koreans were getting worse and worse each day and something must be done with them. Father denied saying that. Kim charged he had heard that a while ago by the pulping machine. He strongly resented being looked down upon, as he said, because Korea was ruled by Japan. Mother tried to calm Kim but to no avail. All this time father stood there in deep thought. Then his eyes lighted up and I recall him saying something like this, "I know now. Kim-san, you heard wrong." I was yelling at Koji through the noise that the galvanized iron covering of the pulper was broken and getting worse every day. It nicks the coffee and hulling the pulp. Since we were not tenants of the Heinz Captain Cook Coffee Co. Limited, we were allowed to pulp our own coffee. Kim was unconvinced. "Let's ask your boy Koji. Youngsters don't tell lies." And the two went to Koji and Kim shouted questions at him. Father went to shut off the gasoline engine which turned the pulper so that all could hear better. Koji took Kim to the defective pulper and showed him the damaged coffee beans. Kim looked at father apologetically and said, "Papa-san, I was wrong." As he said this, the tenseness in the charged atmosphere disappeared. Kim had a warmth in his eyes for us that I had never seen before. "Never mind. Forget everything. Come, let's drink a cup of rice wine," father said. I sat nearby and listened to their conversation for a long time as the two talked seriously. They argued some about Korea, but there were smiles and laughter too. Mother dipped small bottles of rice wine in the singing kettiali over the kitchen fire and the two talked on and on. Supper was delayed 2 hours that night, and after we had finished eating, Kim went with father and Koji to finish the pulping by the light of kerosene lanterns. That night I asked mother why Kim had misunderstood father. Mother explained to me that there are many Koreans like Kim who believe Japan conquered Korea. They are bitter against all Japanese and want independence. But Japan has not conquered Korea. Japan protects Korea, she said. From a box she took out a book and showed me pictures of the Japanese nobility. Then pointing to a couple she said, "This is a Japanese princess, married to a Korean prince. Japan and Korea are like one nation. If Japan does not look after Korea, the white man will gulp her up." Years later I found that Japan was a subjugator of Korea and I became actively interested in their independence struggle. As she closed the book that night, mother said that you Ten and Kim are like members of our family. "You must never forget that we are no better than any other people," she said. This conception was drilled into me time and time again. When I asked her about the Eda, Japanese outcasts, whose social position in Japan stuck with them even in Kona and caused them to suffer ostracism, I was told that they were as good or better than we were. But no one with feeling could escape noticing that these families were discriminated against in the Japanese community. Footnote: the Japanese Eda were sometimes called kori, a person in an unclean occupation, such as slaughterhouse or tannery work. See Futch 111-12. Footnote end. In time I felt keenly the injustice of it all, particularly because a son of an Eda family was my bosom friend, and a star pitcher on our baseball team. All of these things made me think. In my own youthful way, I sometimes condemned the prejudices that brought untold and unnecessary sufferings, but only after I learned about the injustices. In retrospect, I recall that at numerous times I was contaminated by the poison of prejudice. It all seems ridiculous today, but during the 1924 Filipino sugar strike, anti-Filipino propaganda was rampant in Kona. Evicted from the plantations, the strikers came to Kona by the truckloads. I learned of the term Spanish fly then, and the mere mention of it actually paralyzed some of the AJA, Americans of Japanese ancestry, girls. Most of the Filipinos were bachelors and it was rumored that they carried Spanish fly, a love potion, on their handkerchiefs. If a woman smelled its scent, she would become the carrier's love captive, it was said. Young girls of junior and senior high school age walked on the opposite side of the road when they saw a Filipino approaching. They practically tiptoed, watching his hand to see if he pulled out his handkerchief, and ran as soon as they passed the Filipino. When I went to Georgia to study later, I observed the same kind of attack against Negroes. There, a Negro man approaching a white woman on a sidewalk was expected to cross to the opposite sidewalk. This was only a step advance from the insanity of the Spanish fly bugaboo. For a time the talk of Spanish fly, and all the imagination that went along with it, caused near hysteria in our community. It was just like mother to ask Esperidian what Spanish fly was. She must have been concerned because of my older sister. Esperidian told mother that in his opinion, the Filipinos themselves did not know what Spanish fly was. Mother asked him to engage a few Filipinos to work for us. They ale boarded with us, and later, about 6 of them lived with us. We felt bad because Filipinos were subjected to such treatment, and mother tried to make them feel that our home was theirs. Mother used to tell us that long ago the Japanese laborers were mostly bachelors too, since the sugar planters brought over single men. Men fought over the few women, and stole wives, she said. There was no difference between Filipino and Japanese. But such incidents were possible in unnatural conditions among men who were forced by conditions of poverty at home in the Orient to sell their bodies for labor on Hawaii's sugar plantations.